Hi friends, you may think you know the tale of Waterloo, that fateful clash where empires trembled and fell. But have you ever pondered what it felt like through my eyes? The eyes of a steadfast warhorse who bore the weight of riders and the thunder of cannons, witnessing Napoleon's defeat in 1815 from the very heart of the fray. I was there, amid the mud and mist, my hooves pounding the earth as history unfolded around me. Welcome to The Animal Historian. I invite you to rest, relax, and let this story carry you away. If you enjoy these journeys through history, please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to know where you're listening from tonight. Share it in the comments below and tell me which animal story you'd like to hear next. Your ideas inspire the next adventures. Now settle in, close your eyes if you wish, and let my voice guide you back to a time long past. I am Breeze, a name given to me by the gentle winds that swept across the fields of my youth, though in the annals of war, I was simply known as a mount in the British cavalry. My story begins not on the blood-soaked plains of Belgium, but in the quiet meadows of England, where the world was soft and unhurried. It was the year 1805, a time when the Napoleonic Wars raged across Europe. But for me, a young foal, life was a tapestry of simple sensations. The warmth of the sun filtering through the leaves, the sweet scent of fresh hay mingling with the earthy aroma of damp soils, and the rhythmic lull of my mother's heartbeat as I nestled against her side. I was born on a modest farm in the rolling hills of Kent, a region known for its fertile lands and sturdy horse breeds. The farmer, a kind soul named Mr. Hargrove, specialized in raising horses for the army, a practice that had become increasingly vital as the conflicts with France dragged on. You see, in those days, the British military relied heavily on equine companions like me. We were the engines of war, carrying soldiers into battle, pulling artillery, and scouting the unknown. But few know the secret behind our breeding, a deliberate effort by the government to import Arabian stallions from the east to cross with native English mares, creating mounts that combined endurance with speed. This wasn't widely advertised, as it drew from captured prizes during earlier campaigns, like those from the Egyptian expedition in 1798, where Napoleon's own forces left behind bloodlines that subtly influenced our island stables. It added a layer of exotic resilience to us, a quiet, historical thread woven into our very veins. As a foal, my days were filled with the gentle cadence of exploration. I remember the first time I felt the grass tickle my hooves, soft and yielding, like a whisper from the earth itself. The farm was a haven of peace, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of birds in the hedgerows, the occasional creak of a wooden gate swinging in the breeze. My mother, a bay mare with a coat as smooth as polished walnut, taught me the ways of the herd. She would nuzzle me softly, her breath warm and reassuring, guiding me to the safest grazing spots where the clover grew thick and sweet. The air carried hints of wildflowers, lavender and chamomile, that soothed my senses, lulling me into drowsy afternoons under the shade of ancient oaks. Those trees, with their gnarled branches reaching like protective arms, seemed eternal, much like the quiet rhythm of farm life. But even in that serenity, there were hints of the world beyond. Mr. Hargrove would often speak in hushed tones with visitors from the army, men in crisp uniforms who inspected us young ones with keen eyes. They measured our height, checked our teeth, and ran hands along our flanks, assessing our potential for service. I didn't understand their words then, but I felt the shift in the air, a subtle tension like the calm before a summer storm. One lesser-known aspect of this era was the horse tax of 1796, imposed to fund the wars, which pressured farmers like Hargrove to sell their best stock to the military at fixed prices, ensuring a steady supply, but often straining rural economies. It was a hidden burden, one that made our early lives a commodity in the grand scheme of empire. As I grew, my legs strengthened, carrying me across the pastures with increasing grace. By my second year, I was weaned and began basic training. The halter felt strange at first, a gentle pressure around my head, but the groom's voice was calm, repeating soft commands. Walk on, easy now, steady. We learned to respond to touch, to the nudge of a knee, or the pull of reins, all in the quiet enclosure of the paddock. The sun would warm my back as I trotted in circles, the ground soft underfoot, yielding with each step. I can still recall the scent of leather being oiled, mixed with the hay dust that danced in the light. These sessions were repetitive, soothing in their predictability. The clip-clop of hooves on packed earth, the swish of tails fending off flies, the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer shaping shoes. It was during this time that I first encountered humans in a deeper way. Mr. Hargrove's daughter, a girl named Eliza with hair like golden wheat, would bring apples from the orchard, her small hands offering them with a whisper. "Good boy, Breeze," she'd say, her voice like a melody. Those moments were pure tranquility, the crunch of the fruit, juice sweet on my tongue, her laughter light as the breeze that stirred the leaves. But beneath it all lurked the purpose of our upbringing. A secret not often shared is that many war horses were conditioned early to the sounds of battle through simulated drills on farms. Farmers would bang pots or fire blank shots from a distance to accustom us to noise, preventing panic later. It started subtly for me. A far-off drumbeat one day, the crack of a whip the next, each building my resilience without shattering the peace. By 1808, as I approached maturity, standing tall at 15 hands with a chestnut coat that gleamed like burnished copper, the army came calling. The wars had escalated. Napoleon's Grande Armée swept through Europe, from Spain to Russia, demanding more mounts from Britain's shores. I was selected for the household cavalry, a prestigious unit, though few realize the rigorous selection process involved not just physical prowess, but temperament tests, exposing us to crowds and sudden movements to ensure we remained calm under duress. The day I left the farm was bittersweet. The wagon rumbled along rutted lanes, the scent of home fading, fresh turned soil giving way to the salt-tinged air of the coast. I felt the sway of the journey, the creak of wood, the murmur of waves, as we boarded a ship for initial barracks in London. Arriving at the regimental stables was a new world. The air was thicker here, laced with the musk of many horses, the polish of boots, and the faint tang of gun oil. My stall was clean, bedded with straw that rustled softly under my hooves, and the routine began. Mornings started with the soft glow of dawn filtering through high windows, grooms brushing our coats in long, rhythmic strokes that lulled me into a daze. Breakfast was oats, hearty and warming, their nutty aroma filling the air. We drilled in the yard, trotting in formation, learning to wheel and halt as one. The commands were gentle at first, whispered encouragements, building to firmer tones. I remember the feel of the saddle for the first time, its weight even and reassuring, the rider's legs a steady presence. Life in the barracks had its own calm rhythm. Evenings brought quiet, the nickers of fellow horses, the distant toll of church bells marking the hours, the soft patter of rain on the roof. But woven into this were preparations for what lay ahead. A historical secret from this period is the use of herbal remedies for horses. Regimental veterinarians brewed tinctures of willow bark and chamomile to ease aches from training, a practice borrowed from ancient Roman texts, but refined during the wars to keep us fit without alerting the enemy to supply strains. It soothed my muscles after long days, allowing restful nights where dreams carried me back to Kent's Meadows. As the years passed, from 1808 to 1814, I served in minor duties, parades, escorts, my world expanding, yet remaining grounded in sensory comforts. The clink of bridles, the warmth of stable lamps in winter, the fresh scent of spring grass. But whispers of greater conflicts reached even us animals. Napoleon's exile to Elba in 1814 brought a fragile peace, and I thought my days might remain thus, quiet, uneventful. As I grazed in the fields outside the barracks, feeling the sun's gentle caress and hearing the wind sigh through the trees, I sensed a stirring. The peace was fragile, like a thin layer of frost on a pond, ready to crack. Little did I know, Napoleon's return was imminent, pulling me toward the continent and the build-up to Waterloo. But that calm would not last. I felt the distant rumble of change approaching, soft as thunder on the horizon. As the winter of 1814 gave way to the tentative blooms of spring in 1815, the barracks in London hummed with a subdued rhythm that I had grown accustomed to. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of budding lilacs from the nearby gardens, mingling with the familiar odors of hay and polished leather. My days were a gentle cycle of routine, morning feeds of oats that crunched warmly under my teeth, grooming sessions where brushes glided over my coat in long, soothing strokes, and afternoon drills in the yard where the ground was firm and even, each hoofbeat a soft echo in the quiet enclosure. The riders, officers of the household cavalry, moved with practiced ease, their voices low and steady as they guided us through formations. I felt the weight of the saddle, balanced and familiar, and the reins' gentle tug, like a whispered suggestion rather than a command. Evenings brought rest in my stall, the straw bedding soft and inviting, the distant murmur of the Thames lulling me into sleep under the soft glow of lantern light. But that tranquility began to shift in early March. Whispers among the men grew into urgent conversations, carried on the wind like distant thunder. Napoleon had escaped from Elba, that rocky isle where he had been exiled, and was marching on Paris with a growing army. The news spread like a ripple through water, stirring the barracks into quiet activity. I sensed the change in the air, a sharper tang of sweat from the humans, the hurried clatter of boots on cobblestones, the increased rustle of papers and orders. Few know the secret behind his swift return. Napoleon had maintained covert networks of loyalists, including horse breeders in southern France, who supplied fresh mounts smuggled from Corsica, allowing his small force to cover ground rapidly without exhausting their animals. This underground equine support was a hidden lifeline drawing from pre-war stockpiles that evaded Allied spies, enabling the 100 Days to unfold with surprising speed. By mid-March, mobilization orders arrived. The Allied forces, under the Duke of Wellington, were to assemble in Belgium to counter the threat. My regiment, the 1st Life Guards, was among those called to action. The preparations were methodical, yet infused with an underlying calm. The packing of saddles and bridles, the inspection of hooves for shoes that gleamed like silver in the lamplight. I was fitted with new tack, the leather supple and oiled, its scent rich and reassuring. A lesser-known aspect of this buildup was the British remount system. In a rush to equip the cavalry, the government requisitioned thousands of horses from civilian sources, including race courses and private estates, often without full compensation. This led to a mix of breeds in the ranks, thoroughbreds alongside draft crosses, creating units with varied endurance, a secret vulnerability that would later affect charges at Waterloo. We departed London in late April, a procession of men and horses moving through the streets at dawn. The city was awakening softly, the fog from the river curling like gentle breath, the clip-clop of our hooves muffled on the damp pavement. Crowds gathered quietly, waving handkerchiefs, their voices a murmur of encouragement. I felt the rhythm of the march, steady and unhurried, my muscles warming to the task. The journey to the coast was over roads lined with hedgerows, where wildflowers nodded in the breeze, their petals scattering like soft confetti. We rested in meadows at night, the grass cool and dewy underfoot, the stars above a vast, peaceful canopy. The scent of campfires drifted, smoky and warm, blending with the earthy aroma of turned soil from nearby farms. Arriving at Ostend in early May, the sea air greeted us, salty and invigorating, with the cry of gulls wheeling overhead. The crossing to Belgium was aboard the transport ships, their decks creaking softly under the weight of hooves. I was led into a hold, partitioned for horses, the space snug, but bedded with fresh straw that rustled soothingly. The roll of the waves was gentle at first, a rocking lullaby, though some of my companions shifted uneasily. Grooms spoke in hushed tones, offering handfuls of hay to calm us, their hands steady and familiar. A historical secret from these voyages is the use of slings to prevent injury during rough seas. Horses like me were suspended in canvas harnesses that distributed weight evenly, a technique adapted from Dutch traders, but rarely documented in British accounts, saving countless animals from broken legs. Landing in Belgium, the landscape unfolded in soft greens and golds, the flat fields of Flanders, dotted with windmills, turning lazily in the wind. We marched southward toward Brussels, the roads wide and even, bordered by canals, where water reflected the sky like a mirror. The air carried the scent of blooming orchards, apples and pears ripening early, and the distant toll of village bells, their chimes melodic and reassuring. Encampments were set up in pastures, our lines picketed with ropes that allowed grazing, the grass lush and sweet on my tongue. Daily life here blended routine with anticipation. Morning inspections, where farriers checked our shoes with soft taps of hammers. Afternoon exercises in open fields, where we practiced wheeling in formation, the ground yielding softly under trotting hooves. In Brussels, the atmosphere was a curious mix of festivity and quiet resolve. The city buzzed gently with allied officers attending balls and gatherings. But for us horses, it was the stables near the Grand Place that provided sanctuary. The cobbles were smooth, the air scented with spices from nearby markets, cinnamon and cloves wafting on the breeze. I recall the warmth of the sun filtering through stable windows, casting golden patterns on the floor, and the soft nicker of companions sharing the space. Wellington's headquarters hummed with strategy, though few realize a hidden element. The Duke's personal reliance on Copenhagen, his chestnut gelding, whose calm demeanor influenced command decisions, as he preferred mounts that allowed clear thinking amid chaos, a subtle equestrian psychology not often highlighted in histories. As May turned to June, patrols increased. We scouted the countryside, hooves sinking slightly into the loamy soil, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Reports of Napoleon's movements filtered through, his army swelling, pushing northward. Tensions rose subtly like a gathering mist, but our routines held, grooming that left coats gleaming, feeds of grain that warmed from within, rests under shady trees where leaves rustled like a soft sigh. Another secret of the Napoleonic cavalry was the French use of horse hospitals. Mobile veterinary units followed the Grande Armée, employing innovative treatments like arsenic-based tonics for stamina, a practice the British adopted covertly during the Peninsular War, but expanded for Waterloo, ensuring more mounts survived the march. By mid-June, we moved closer to the frontier, encamping near Quatre Bras. The fields were vast, the horizon flat and serene, broken only by distant church spires. Nights were quiet, the stars bright overhead, the occasional whinny echoing softly. But I felt the subtle shift, the men's voices lower, their touches firmer on the reins. Skirmishes began, faint echoes of musket fire in the distance, like far-off fireworks. We charged in minor engagements, the ground thundering softly under massed hooves, but always pulling back to regroup in the calm of the camps. A lesser-known fact is the role of Belgian draft horses. Requisitioned locally, they pulled artillery with stoic strength, their heavier builds complementing lighter cavalry mounts like mine. A logistical blend that bolstered Wellington's mobility but strained supply lines. Life on the march had its own soothing patterns, the sway of the column, the scent of wild herbs crushed underfoot, the warmth of the sun on my back. As rain began to fall in gentle sheets on June 17th, soaking the earth into a soft mud that clung to hooves, I sensed the approach of something greater. The army positioned itself along ridges, the air thick with moisture and anticipation. Whispers of a coming battle stirred, but the night remained quiet, so very quiet. Little did I know, the morrow would bring the clash at Waterloo, where fates would collide amid the storm. But for now, the rain pattered softly, a lullaby veiling the horizon's unrest. The dawn of June 18th, 1815, broke softly over the fields near Waterloo, a small village in Belgium that would soon etch its name into eternity. The rain from the previous night had ceased, leaving the air heavy with moisture, the ground a soft, yielding mud that clung gently to my hooves like a reluctant embrace. I stood in the lines of the British cavalry, positioned on the reverse slope of Mont Saint-Jean, my breath forming faint clouds in the cool morning mist. The world around me was hushed. The distant lowing of cattle from nearby farms, the soft rustle of leaves in the hedgerows, the occasional nicker from my fellow mounts as we awaited the day's unfolding. My rider, a young lieutenant named Hargreaves, perhaps a distant kin to my old farmer, though I never knew, patted my neck with a steady hand, his touch warm and reassuring amid the quiet anticipation. The Allied army, under Wellington's command, stretched along the ridge in a defensive line, a mix of British, Dutch, Belgian, and Prussian forces, totaling around 68,000 men, we horses numbered in the thousands, our roles vital, yet often overlooked in the grand narratives. As the sun rose higher, filtering through the haze in gentle rays that warmed my coat, the scents of the battlefield began to mingle, the damp earth, the faint smoke from bivouac fires dying down, the herbal tang of wet grass underfoot. Few know a secret of Wellington's strategy that morning, the deliberate use of the terrain's natural contours inspired by his experiences in the Peninsula War, where he had learned from Spanish guerrillas how to conceal troop movements behind ridges, a tactic not widely taught in military academies, but drawn from local folklore and adapted to hide our cavalry reserves from French artillery spotters. Our position was one of relative calm in those early hours. The men adjusted saddles and girths with soft murmurs, the leather creaking faintly like a sigh. I grazed sparingly on the sparse grass, its blades cool and dewy, feeling the rhythm of my herd companions nearby, the steady breathing, the swish of tails, the soft shift of weight from one leg to another. Breakfast for us was a measure of oats, doled out in nose bags that smelled of grain and canvas, their contents warming my belly against the chill. The Duke himself rode by on Copenhagen, his voice low as he conferred with officers, the air carrying snippets of plans, hold the line, await Blücher's Prussians. A lesser-known detail is Wellington's personal correspondence that night. He had penned a letter to a friend admitting doubts about the battle's outcome, a rare vulnerability hidden from histories, but preserved in private archives, reflecting the quiet tension that even we animals sensed in the men's subdued tones. As mid-morning approached, around 10 o'clock, the French army arrayed itself across the valley, their drums beginning a distant, rhythmic pulse that echoed like a heartbeat through the mist. I lifted my head, ears pricking forward, feeling the vibration in the ground, a subtle tremor, soft as a whisper. Napoleon's forces, numbering about 72,000, included veteran cavalry like the cuirassiers and lancers, their mounts gleaming under polished armor. From my vantage, I could see the faint glint of bayonets and standards, the tricolor flags fluttering gently in the breeze. The air grew thicker with the scent of gunpowder, residue from prior skirmishes, blended with the floral notes of wildflowers crushed under countless feet. One historical secret not commonly shared is the French use of flying ambulances, mobile medical units designed by Dominique Leray, Napoleon's chief surgeon, which included horse-drawn carts for rapid evacuation, innovation that saved lives but also allowed quicker redeployment of wounded horses, extending the Grande Armée's endurance in ways the Allies underestimated. The battle commenced around 11:30 with the French assault on Hougoumont, a fortified farmhouse to our right. The cannonade began softly at first, a distant boom like thunder rolling over hills, sending puffs of smoke that drifted lazily skyward. I felt the ground shudder faintly, my muscles tensing instinctively. But Hargreaves' voice soothed me. Easy, breeze, steady now. We remained in reserve, the slope shielding us, the air filled with the acrid tang of spent powder wafting on the wind. Infantry squares formed ahead, their ranks a patchwork of red coats and blue, the bayonets fixed with a soft clink. As a horse, I observed the humans' rituals, the quiet prayers, the sharing of water from canteens, the way they leaned on muskets with weary grace. Another hidden facet was the role of Scottish pipers in the Highland regiments. Their bagpipes played low, haunting tunes to steady nerves, a tradition borrowed from clan warfare, but adapted here to mask the fear, their melodies carrying over the fields like a calming lullaby. The fighting at Hougoumont intensified gradually, musket fire crackling like dry branches in a fire, the shouts of men muffled by distance. Smoke began to veil the valley, soft and ethereal, turning the sun's light into a diffused glow. We shifted positions slightly, hooves sinking into the mud with a gentle squelch, the earth cool and pliant. I remember the warmth of Hargreaves' legs against my sides, his heartbeat quickening, yet controlled, sinking with mine in that shared quiet. A secret from this phase is the covert signaling system. Wellington employed semaphore flags hidden behind the ridge, relaying orders without exposing messengers to fire, a method inspired by naval communications, but refined for land use, ensuring coordinated responses that surprised the French. By early afternoon, around 1 o'clock, the grand battery of French artillery opened fire, the barrage building to a steady rhythm, boom after boom, the air vibrating with each discharge. Shrapnel whispered overhead, but our position held us safe for now, the impacts thudding into the forward slopes like rain on a roof. The scent of charred earth mingled with the metallic bite of blood. Though faint from afar, infantry bore the brunt, forming squares against probing cavalry, their volleys a rhythmic pop-pop that echoed softly. As a warhorse, I had been trained for this, the gradual exposure to noise during drills back in England, now paying off in my steady stance. Yet, I felt the collective unease, the way tails flicked more frequently, ears swiveling to every sound. The assault on La Haye-Sainte, another key farmhouse, followed. The fighting there, a closer murmur of chaos. Prussian scouts arrived with messages of Blucher's approach, their horses lathered but calm, sharing the lines briefly. The air carried the scent of sweat-soaked wool from uniforms, blended with the ozone tang after each cannon shot. A lesser-known truth is Napoleon's health that day, suffering from hemorrhoids and possibly a urinary infection. He relied more on aids like Ney, a detail suppressed in French accounts, but noted in captured letters, influencing delayed decisions that rippled through the battle like a soft undercurrent. As the hours wore on, we in the cavalry reserves maintained our vigil, the sun arcing higher. In a sky now patched with clouds, rations were passed, hay for us, biscuits for the men, their crunch a small comfort. I nuzzled at the offered forage, its dry sweetness grounding me amid the growing din. The battlefield's symphony was layered, the soft whinny of wounded horses in the distance, the murmur of orders, the wind sighing through the rye fields that waved like a golden sea, but beneath it all, a sense of escalation built, quiet yet insistent. Toward mid-afternoon, around 3 o'clock, the French launched d'Erlon's corps against our center, infantry columns advancing with bayonets fixed, drums beating a steady cadence. The clash was nearer now, the ground trembling more distinctly, smoke thickening like a gentle fog. We stirred in our lines, riders mounting with soft commands, the jingle of bits of familiar melody. Hargreaves swung into the saddle, his weight even and reassuring, whispering encouragements that blended with the breeze. The countercharge by our heavy brigade was imminent, but for the moment we held the quiet before the surge. So very quiet, little did I know. The full fury of the cavalry clashes awaited, where I would thunder into the heart of the fray. But as the sun dipped slightly, casting longer shadows, the tension coiled softly like a spring in repose. As the afternoon sun hung midway in the sky on that fateful June 18th, casting a warm, diffused light through the lingering smoke, the battlefield at Waterloo stirred with a mounting rhythm that I felt deep in my chest. The mud beneath my hooves was soft and giving, like a blanket, woven from the earth's own threads, and the air carried a blend of scents. The sharp bite of powder, the damp freshness of trampled rye, and the faint, underlying sweetness of wild herbs, released by the passage of feet and wheels. Our cavalry lines, hidden on the reverse slope, shifted subtly as orders murmured through the ranks, like a gentle breeze rustling leaves. Hargreaves adjusted his stirrups with a soft clink, his hand resting on my withers, warm and steady, sinking our breaths in that moment of poised quiet. The repulse of d'Erlon's infantry assault marked a turning point, their columns faltering under disciplined British volleys, and a timely charge by the Union Brigade. From our position, I heard the thunder of their hooves first, a distant rumble, building like waves on a shore, before seeing the Scots Greys and Inniskillings surge forward, sabers drawn in glinting arcs. The clash was a muffled roar, the ground vibrating softly as if the earth itself sighed. We in the household cavalry remained in reserve, our role to support if needed. But the air thickened with the acrid haze of musketry, veiling the valley in a soft, ethereal fog. A historical secret from this moment is the tactical use of refused flanks. Wellington had angled his line's ends inward, a subtlety learned from ancient Roman formations, but rarely credited, preventing envelopment and channeling attacks into kill zones where artillery could whisper death from concealed positions. As the Union Brigade overran French guns, capturing eagles and scattering battalions, a hush fell briefly over our sector, the cries of men fading into echoes, the smoke drifting lazily like morning mist over a meadow. I felt Hargreaves tense slightly, his legs pressing my sides in anticipation, but the command held us back. Below, the fields were a tapestry of movement, redcoats reforming lines with measured steps, the wounded being carried rearward on stretchers that swayed gently. The scent of blood mingled faintly with the ozone after each cannon shot, yet the wind carried it away, leaving pockets of calm where birds dared to chirp from distant trees. Few know the hidden contribution of Nassau troops. These German allies, often overshadowed, held key orchards with guerrilla-style ambushes, using farm tools as improvised weapons, a remnant of folk resistance tactics from the Rhineland, bolstering the line without fanfare. Around 4 o'clock, the French cavalry, under Marshal launched their grand assaults, waves of cuirassiers, dragoons, and lancers, thundering up the slope toward our center. The ground trembled more insistently now, a soft quake that traveled up my legs, but our infantry had formed squares, impenetrable hedges of bayonets that stood firm like ancient oaks. From afar, I saw the gleam of breastplates, the flutter of pennants, the horses' manes flowing like silk in the breeze. The charges crashed against the squares in a symphony of clashes, sabers ringing on steel, hooves churning the mud into a frothy loam. We watched as the French milled about, seeking openings that weren't there, their mounts wheeling in confusion. The air filled with the metallic tang of clashing arms, blended with the earthy release of sod torn asunder. Our moment came as the French recoiled from another failed charge. Wellington signaled the heavy cavalry forward, the Life Guards and Blues and Royals, to counterattack and relieve pressure on the squares. Hargreaves's spurs touched my flanks lightly, a whisper of urging, and we surged over the crest in formation. The slope descended gently, the mud yielding under accelerating hooves, each step a soft thud, building to a gallop. The wind rushed past my ears, cool and invigorating, carrying the sense of sweat and leather from my comrades. We closed on the retreating cuirassiers, sabers extended, the clash inevitable, yet unfolding like a dream. I felt the rhythm of the charge, the rise and fall of my stride, the warmth of exertion spreading through my muscles, the collective breath of the brigade like a single entity. The impact was a blur of motion, steel meeting steel, with a resonant clang, horses shouldering aside in a tangle of limbs and tack. Hargreaves wielded his sword with precision, the blade whistling softly through the air. I dodged a lance thrust instinctively, my hooves finding purchase in the slick ground, the mud splattering like gentle rain. Around us, the melee swirled, grunts of effort, the soft whinny of startled mounts, the fall of bodies cushioned by the earth. A secret not often revealed is the French cavalry's overextension. Ney's repeated charges were partly due to misread signals from Napoleon, who intended infantry support but was delayed by his aides, horse stumbling in mud, a minor equine mishap documented in private journals, altering the battle's flow and exhausting their mounts prematurely. We pushed the French back toward the valley, capturing standards that fluttered like captured birds. The fields below were a mosaic of chaos, abandoned cannons half sunk in mire, riderless horses wandering, with reins trailing like forgotten threads. The sun filtered through the smoke in golden shafts, warming the scene with an almost serene glow. But our advance carried us too far, into range of fresh French batteries that opened fire with a rhythmic boom. Grape shot hissed overhead, soft as wind through grass, forcing a withdrawal. Hargreaves guided me back up the slope, his voice calm amid the din. "Back, Breeze, easy now." We reformed behind the crest, breaths coming in steady huffs, the air thick with the scent of expended powder and heated metal. In the lull that followed, around 5 o'clock, the battlefield breathed, a quiet interlude where the wounded called faintly, like echoes in a vast hall. Grooms moved among us with water buckets, the liquid cool and refreshing on my tongue, washing away the dust of battle. I felt the sting of minor grazes, but the adrenaline soothed them like a balm from within. The Prussians' approach was whispered now, their vanguard engaging Napoleon's right at Plancenoit, the distant rumble a comforting undertone. Another hidden layer is Blücher's personal vow. The aging Prussian general, bruised from Ligny 2 days prior, rode a mare named after his wife for luck, a sentimental detail from his letters that motivated his timely march, turning the tide without Allied knowledge until the last hours. As evening shadows lengthened, the French renewed their efforts, focusing on La Haye-Sainte, which fell after fierce house-to-house fighting. The loss exposed our center, the air alive with renewed cannonade, shots arcing like falling stars, impacting with soft thuds that sent earth pluming upward. We shifted positions again, hooves sinking into deepening ruts, the mud now a cooling paste against my legs. Infantry plugged the gap with volleys that crackled rhythmically, holding the line as dusk approached. The scents shifted, the fading floral notes giving way to the dominant char of smoke, yet pockets of fresh air wafted from the rear, carrying hints of rain on the horizon. Napoleon's Imperial Garde prepared for their advance, the elite grognards marching with measured steps, their bearskin hats bobbing like dark sentinels. From our vantage, we saw them ascend the slope, drums beating a steady tattoo that resonated through the ground. The air tensed, a palpable hush falling over our ranks. The quiet before the storm, so very quiet. Wellington's famous order rippled through up guards and at them. The clash was imminent, but for us in the cavalry, it meant readying for pursuit. I felt Hargreaves' grip tighten on the reins, his pulse quickening in harmony with mine. Little did I know, this final push would shatter the French resolve, leading to rout and my plunge into the valley's depths. But as the Garde crested the ridge, the tension coiled softly, like twilight enveloping the fields. The twilight hues deepened over the fields of Waterloo as the Imperial Garde crested the ridge, their advance a measured tread that sent soft vibrations through the earth, like the pulse of a distant drum. The air was thick with the haze of smoke, softening the outlines of their tall bearskin hats and the glint of fixed bayonets, turning the scene into a dreamlike tableau. I stood firm in the cavalry lines, my hooves planted in the cooling mud that cradled them gently, the scent of damp soil rising to mingle with the fading, acrid bite of gunpowder. Hargreaves' hand rested on my mane, his touch a steady anchor, as the Allied infantry rose from their prone positions behind the crest, a clever concealment that had shielded them from the earlier barrage, now unfolding like petals in the evening light. Wellington's command echoed softly through the ranks. Now, Maitland, now's your time. The British Guards, the first foot guards among them, leveled their muskets in a line that stretched like a quiet barrier across the slope. The French Garde, those veteran grognards who had followed Napoleon from Egypt to Moscow, marched in echelon formation, battalions staggered like steps on a staircase to maximize their frontage while protecting flanks. But few know a hidden detail of this assault. The Guards' attack was not a unified wave, but divided into phases, with the middle guard leading, and the old guard held in reserve, a tactical nuance drawn from Napoleon's earlier victories, but undermined here by the lack of immediate artillery support. As the Grand Battery had been silenced earlier, leaving them exposed like a ship without wind, the clash began with a ripple of volleys, the crack of muskets, sharp yet muffled by the smoke, sending plumes of white that drifted lazily upward. I felt the ground shudder faintly as the Garde pressed forward, their boots sinking into the mire with soft squelches, their voices rising in a chant of Vive l'Empereur that carried on the breeze like a solemn hymn. From my vantage, I saw the blue coats advance, the eagles on their standards, catching the last rays of sun in golden flashes. The British line held, reloading with rhythmic motions, ramrods sliding into barrels, the clink of flints, a subtle underscore. Balls whistled overhead, soft as sighs, and men fell quietly, crumpling to the earth that received them gently. As a horse, I marveled at the humans' resolve, their forms silhouetted against the dimming sky, unmoving like ancient stones. The Garde closed to within paces, bayonets thrusting forward in a hedge of steel, but the volleys tore gaps in their ranks, the air filling with the metallic tang of blood and the earthy release of disturbed soil. Then, from the flank, the 52nd Foot, light infantry, often overlooked in tales of glory, wheeled out, their fire enfilading the French column like a whisper from the side. This maneuver, secret not widely chronicled, was improvised by Colonel Colborne, based on terrain intuition, catching the Garde off guard and turning their advance into hesitation, a pivotal shift that histories attribute broadly, but stems from this unit's bold pivot documented in regimental diaries hidden in archives. Panic stirred as the cry went up, La Garde recule, the Garde retreats, a phrase that rippled through the French lines like a chill wind through leaves. The once unbreakable formation wavered, men turning with measured steps that quickened into disorder. The air grew heavier with the scent of fear sweat, blending with the cooling grass and distant wood smoke from farmhouses. Wellington seized the moment, his hat waving high as he signaled the general advance. Go on, go on. The infantry surged forward, bayonets lowered, their cheers a murmur rising to a steady roar. We in the cavalry stirred, Hargreaves urging me with a soft knee pressure, and we crested the ridge in a wave, hooves finding rhythm on the downward slope. The rout began in earnest as the French lines dissolved, soldiers discarding packs and muskets that sank into the mud like forgotten relics. I galloped into the valley, the ground soft and undulating beneath me, the wind cooling my flanks as we pursued. The fleeing masses were a sea of blue, weaving through the rye fields that swayed gently, parting like water before our advance. Cannon abandoned in the mire gleamed dully, wheels half buried, and riderless horses joined our charge, their manes flowing in tandem. The scents shifted, the sharp ozone of fear giving way to the herbal crush of trampled plants, thyme and clover releasing their essence in soothing waves. Another lesser-known aspect of this pursuit was the role of Prussian cavalry. Blücher's Uhlans and hussars, arriving from the east, harried the French flanks with lances that whispered through the dusk. Their integration, a seamless blend of allies that Napoleon's scouts had underestimated due to forged dispatches planted by Wellington's intelligence, a covert operation revealed in declassified letters years later. We overtook stragglers, sabers, flashing in arcs that caught the twilight gleam, but the chase was more a flow than frenzy, the French melting away into the gathering shadows. I felt Hargreaves' balance shift as he parried a desperate thrust, The clash, a resonant note that faded quickly. The valley floor was littered with the detritus of defeat, knapsacks spilling contents like scattered seeds, eagles toppled and muddied, the earth absorbing it all with quiet acceptance. Distant church bells tolled the hour, their chimes melodic and distant, a reminder of the world beyond the fray. As night encroached, the pursuit slowed, our breaths coming in steady puffs that misted the air, the coolness settling like a blanket. In pockets of calm, amid the rout, wounded called softly, their voices blending with a rustle of wind through the crops. Grooms and aides moved among them, offering water from canteens that gurgled gently, the liquid a small mercy. I paused briefly as Hargreaves dismounted to secure a prisoner, the man's uniform torn, but his eyes resigned, the exchange wordless and peaceful. The stars began to emerge overhead, pinpricks of light in the velvet sky, casting a serene glow over the fields. A hidden truth of Napoleon's final moments is his narrow escape. Mounted on his white Arabian mare Marengo, he fled amid the chaos, switching horses multiple times to evade captures, a detail from eyewitness accounts suppressed in French memoirs to preserve his aura, but noted by Prussian pursuers who nearly caught him at Canepa, where a bridge collapse delayed them. As we regrouped near La Belle Alliance, the inn where Napoleon had planned his victory, the air carried the faint scent of extinguished fires and cooling metal. The French army fragmented into the night, retreating southward along roads that wound like quiet rivers. We picketed in a meadow, the grass damp and inviting underfoot, my muscles aching with a warm fatigue that invited rest. Hargreaves fed me a handful of oats, their nutty aroma grounding me, his whispers of praise a lullaby. The battlefield fell into a profound quiet, the moans fading, the wind sighing through the trees, the occasional whinny echoing softly. Yet even in victory, a sense of reflection settled. I pondered the humans' wars, their grand designs unraveling like threads in the breeze, leaving the earth to heal in its own time. The moon rose, bathing the scene in silver, turning the mud to a shimmering veil. But the aftermath was just beginning. The tally of losses, the search for comrades, the slow return to normalcy. Little did I know, the days ahead would bring tending to wounds and a journey homeward where peace awaited like a distant meadow. The night following the battle at Waterloo enveloped the fields in a profound stillness, the moon casting a silver veil over the muddied plains where so much had transpired. I stood in a makeshift corral near La Belle Alliance, my legs weary but steady, the cool air brushing my coat like a gentle hand smoothing furrows in sand. The sense of the day lingered faintly, the charred residue of powder, the metallic hint of blood absorbed by the earth, and the fresh, dewy grass that now cradled the fallen in quiet repose. Hargreaves moved about me with careful steps, his lantern casting a soft, golden glow that danced across the ground, illuminating the faces of comrades who shared the space. Water from a bucket sloshed softly as he sponged my flanks, the liquid cool and cleansing, washing away the grime of the charge in rhythmic strokes that lulled my senses. The Allied camp stirred with subdued activity, men tending to the wounded under canvas tents that fluttered like sails in the breeze. The cries of the injured had softened to murmurs, carried on the wind like distant echoes of a fading storm. We horses were gathered in groups, our lines picketed with ropes that allowed gentle movement, the straw bedding rustling underfoot as we shifted. A farrier inspected my hooves, his hammer tapping lightly to check the shoes, the sound of reassuring cadence in the night. Few know a secret of the post-battle care. Wellington's quartermasters had stockpiled herbal poultices made from comfrey and arnica, herbs sourced from local Belgian apothecaries, but based on recipes from the Royal Veterinary College in London, established just 2 decades prior in 1791, a forward-thinking institution that quietly revolutionized equine medicine during the wars, reducing lameness through treatments not yet standard in civilian practice. As the hours deepened, around midnight, patrols returned with reports of the French retreat, their hooves clipping softly on the roads leading south. Napoleon had fled toward Paris, his carriage rumbling away in the dark, leaving behind a trail of discarded equipment that gleamed dully under the stars. I felt the warmth of a blanket draped over my back, its woolen fibers soft and insulating against the chill, and Hargreaves offered a mash of bran and water, its warmth steaming gently in the cool air, the grain soft on my tongue. The campfires dotted the landscape, their flames crackling low and steady, sending spirals of smoke that carried the comforting aroma of burning wood. Men shared stories in hushed tones, their laughter occasional and soft, like bubbles rising in a stream. By dawn on June 19th, the sun rose tentatively, its rays filtering through a light mist that clung to the valleys like a silken shroud. The battlefield revealed itself in softer light, the scattered arms, the overturned caissons, the forms of the fallen now covered with cloaks, in respectful silence. Burial parties moved methodically, their shovels turning the earth with rhythmic thuds, the soil yielding easily after the rains. As a horse, I observed the humans' rituals of remembrance, the quiet prayers whispered over graves, the way they paused to touch a comrade's hand one last time. A lesser-known aspect of this aftermath was the Prussian pursuit. Blücher's forces, relentless in their advance, captured thousands, but adhered to a code of mercy for French officers' mounts, sparing them as prizes rather than destroying them, a chivalric holdover from earlier wars, documented in Blücher's dispatches, but omitted from British glorifications to emphasize their own role. We marched slowly that morning, the column forming with unhurried precision, hooves sinking into the softened paths that wound toward Brussels. The air was fresh, laced with the scent of wild mint crushed underfoot, and birdsong returned tentatively, their melodies weaving through the trees like threads of hope. Hargreaves rode lightly, his weight familiar and even, guiding me with subtle cues, a shift of seat, a soft word. Along the way, we passed villages where locals emerged, offering water from wells that gurgled cool and clear, their faces etched with a mix of relief and sorrow. The news of victory spread like a gentle ripple, church bells tolling in celebration, their chimes resonant and soothing across the countryside. Arriving in Brussels by midday, the city greeted us with a subdued festivity, the streets lined with cheering crowds, but their voices tempered by the sight of bandaged men and limping horses. Flags fluttered from windows, their colors vibrant against the stone facades, and the air carried the aroma of fresh bread baked in haste for the returning troops. Our regiment quartered in stables, near the Parc de Bruxelles, the enclosures clean and bedded with fresh hay that rustled invitingly. I was unsaddled with care, the girth loosening in a sigh of relief, and a groom brushed my coat in long, even strokes that eased the knots from my muscles. Another historical secret is the medical innovations post-Waterloo. Surgeons like Charles Bell experimented with ether-soaked compresses for wounds, a precursor to anesthesia drawn from alchemical texts, but applied here to both men and animals, alleviating pain in ways that accelerated recovery and influenced future veterinary practices. The days in Brussels blurred into a rhythm of healing, the morning feeds of oats mixed with linseed for its soothing oils, the afternoon walks in shaded avenues where leaves whispered overhead, the evening inspections under lantern light. Hargreaves visited often, his hand offering apples from market stalls, their crisp sweetness a reminder of home. Whispers of the war's end circulated, Napoleon's abdication on June 22nd, prompted by the defeat, his second exile looming. The city buzzed gently with diplomats and couriers, their horses clattering on cobbles, but for us, it was a time of rest. By late June, as my minor wounds mended, the grazes scabbing over, with the aid of those herbal salves, the army began demobilization. Units disbanded quietly, men receiving discharges with folded papers that rustled like dry leaves. For the cavalry, this meant assessments. Horses like me were evaluated for continued service or sale. A quiet auction was held in the barracks yard, buyers from across Europe inspecting us with gentle hands, checking teeth and limbs. Few realized the economic undercurrent. The post-war horse market, flooded with surplus mounts, led to a crash in prices. But Wellington advocated for pensions for veteran animals, a novel idea inspired by his own bond with Copenhagen, resulting in hidden funds allocated for their care in retirement farms, a compassionate policy buried in military budgets. It was spared the auction, retained for the regiment due to my steadiness, and we prepared for the return to England. The journey began in early July, marching north to Ostend, under skies that cleared to a serene blue. The roads were firmer now, the mud dried to dust that puffed softly under hooves, the air scented with blooming heather along the waysides. We rested in meadows at night, the stars a vast canopy overhead, the wind sighing through grasses like a lullaby. The sea crossing was calm, the ship rocking gently on waves that lapped the hull, the salt air invigorating yet soothing. Landing in Dover by mid-July, the chalk cliffs rose like silent guardians, the gulls wheeling overhead, with cries that echoed welcomingly. The march to London was triumphant yet tempered, the crowds along the route waving quietly, the bells of wayside churches tolling in harmony. Home felt near, the familiar sense of English soil, rich loam and wild roses, stirring memories of my foalhood, but reflections deepened. The cost of victory, the lives entwined with mine, now scattered like leaves in autumn. Little did I know, the years ahead would bring parades and peace, but also the quiet fading of war's echoes. Upon our return to the barracks in London in mid-July 1815, the familiar rhythms of regimental life enveloped me once more, though softened by the weight of what we had endured. The air carried the comforting sense of the Thames, brackish water mingled with the bloom of summer roses from nearby gardens, and the cobblestones under my hooves felt solid and unchanging, like old friends welcoming us back. The stables were, as I remembered, high-ceilinged halls with stalls lined in fresh straw that rustled gently with each step, the lanterns casting a warm, amber glow that danced on the walls. Hargreaves led me to my familiar spot, his hand steady on my halter, whispering praises that blended with the soft nickers of returning companions. Water troughs gurgled cool and inviting, and a feed of oats awaited, their nutty warmth spreading through me like a sigh of relief. The city buzzed with quiet celebration in those first days. Parades through the streets where crowds gathered in hushed awe, waving flags that fluttered like leaves in a breeze. We marched in formation, my strides even and measured, the sun warming my coat to a glossy sheen. The cheers were subdued, tempered by the news of casualties that filtered through like distant rain. Over 15,000 Allied dead or wounded, a toll that hung in the air like mist. Yet, for us veterans, there was solace in routine, the morning grooming with brushes that glided in long, soothing arcs, the afternoon turnout in the paddocks, where grass tickled my muzzle, soft and verdant. A historical secret from this period is the Victory Medal, while soldiers received the Waterloo Medal, the first of its kind, issued to all ranks, regardless of status, a egalitarian shift inspired by Wellington's advocacy, but quietly pushed through Parliament to boost morale. Horses like me were honored in subtler ways, with engraved brass plates on our stalls, a practice drawn from royal stables, but extended to war mounts as a nod to our shared sacrifices, preserved in regimental inventories, but seldom mentioned in public accounts. As August unfolded, the regiment settled into peacetime duties, escorts for dignitaries, drills that echoed softly in the yard, without the urgency of war. I felt the change in Hargreaves. Promoted to captain for his valor, his visits carried a reflective calm, his hands lingering on my neck as if tracing memories. The barracks rhythm was lulling, the distant toll of Big Ben marking hours, the scent of polished boots and oiled leather permeating the air, the evening feeds where hay bales were unpacked with rustling whispers. Wounds healed under the care of veterinarians, who applied salves of lavender and honey, their applications cool and aromatic, easing the stiffness from my flanks. Few know the hidden veterinary advancements post-Waterloo, the battle's high equine losses, estimated at 10,000 horses, prompted the formation of informal remount committees that studied forage quality, discovering that adding seaweed kelp to diets improved hoof strength, a remedy borrowed from coastal farmers, but integrated into military protocols, reducing lameness by half in subsequent years, as noted in unpublished Army reports. By September, as leaves began to turn, in shades of gold and russet, scattering softly underfoot, the broader implications of victory rippled through Europe. Napoleon's surrender aboard the HMS Bellerophon on July 15th led to his exile on St. Helena, a remote Atlantic isle where he would spend his remaining days. Whispers in the officers' mess spoke of this, couriers arriving with sealed letters that crinkled like dry parchment. For me, it meant a shift to ceremonial roles. We participated in reviews where the Prince Regent inspected us, his carriage wheels rumbling gently on the gravel. The air during these events was festive yet serene, scented with pipe tobacco and fresh-cut flowers from admirers. Another lesser-known facet is the Congress of Vienna's equine diplomacy. Redrawn borders included clauses for horse breeding exchanges, with Prussian stallions sent to Britain as reparations, subtly enhancing bloodlines like mine. A quiet, geopolitical thread woven into stables across the continent, detailed in diplomatic annexes, but overlooked in general histories. Autumn brought cooler winds that sighed through the barracks' eaves, carrying the earthy aroma of fallen leaves and chimney smoke from the city. My days included light exercise, trotting in the arena where the ground was raked smooth, each hoofprint a soft impression soon erased. Hargreaves rode me on outings to Hyde Park, the paths lined with oaks, whose branches arched like protective canopies, the leaves crunching under us in a rhythmic lull. We encountered civilians who approached with quiet reverence, offering carrots that snapped crisply, their sweetness a simple joy. Reflections deepened in these moments. I pondered the fragility of peace, how the thunder of cannons had given way to the gentle patter of rain on rooftops. A secret not often shared is the post-war mental toll on riders. Many officers suffered from battle fatigue, a term predating modern psychology, treated with equine therapy, riding sessions prescribed by physicians, like Sir Astley Cooper, who noted in private journals that time with horses like me calmed nerves, influencing early understandings of trauma bonds between man and animal. As winter approached in November, blankets were added to our stalls, their woolen warmth enveloping me like a hug, and feeds included warmed mashes that steamed softly in the chill air. The regiment prepared for the holidays, decorations of holly and ribbons adorning the stables, their scents piney and fresh. Parades for the festive season were subdued spectacles, lanterns glowing along the route, the clip-clop of hooves echoing on frosted streets. News from afar filtered in. The Treaty of Paris, in November 1815, formalized the peace, restoring France's borders to 1790 lines, with indemnities that funded Allied recoveries. For us, it meant stability, though hidden economic strains emerged. The demobilization flooded markets, with surplus horses, leading to equine welfare societies formed by veterans who petitioned for pastures, a grassroots effort documented in letters to the Times, but suppressed to avoid highlighting war's costs. By December, snow dusted the grounds in a soft blanket, muffling sounds to a whisper, the crunch of boots, the distant carols from chapel services. I rested more, my stall a sanctuary, where straw provided cushioning warmth, the air scented with evergreen boughs, hung for the season. Hargreaves shared us stories by lamplight, his voice low and steady, recounting Waterloo's moments, as if weaving a tapestry. These evenings were peaceful, the flames flickering like stars in miniature. Beneath the calm, changes loomed, retirements, reassignments. Another historical secret is the Waterloo Fund. Public subscriptions raised funds for widows and orphans, but a portion quietly supported veteran horses, establishing retirement farms in Kent, modeled after monastic animal hospices from medieval times, a compassionate legacy buried in charitable ledgers. Into 1816, as spring's first buds emerged in March, the world felt renewed, the air crisp with promise, the grass greening under melting snow. My role evolved to training young recruits, guiding them with patient steps in the yard. The new horses arrived, their coats glossy and untried, and I showed them the ways, responding to reins with subtle shifts, maintaining formation like a gentle dance. The scents of blooming daffodils wafted from gardens, blending with the stable's familiar musk. Reflections on survival grew. I had outlasted the fray, my senses attuned to peace's subtleties, the warmth of sunbeams, the rhythm of breaths in unison. But as the year progressed, personal shifts occurred. Hargreaves received orders for India in June, his farewell a quiet moment, his hand on my muzzle, eyes meeting mine in silent understanding. I was reassigned to a new rider, a lieutenant with a gentle touch, and life continued in its serene flow. A lesser-known truth is the global ripple of Waterloo. It inspired colonial equine reforms, with British cavalry tactics exported to outposts, including selective breeding programs that incorporated Waterloo survivors' lineages, enhancing endurance in distant campaigns. A subtle imperial echo traced in military breeding logs. Through the summer of 1816, parades commemorating the anniversary brought us to the fore. The crowd's applause, a soft wave, the flags snapping in the breeze. Yet, in quiet moments grazing in the fields, I felt the passage of time, the earth's steady turn. Little did I know, the coming years would bring retirement and final reflections, where memories would settle like leaves in autumn. As the seasons turned into 1817, the barracks in London retained their familiar cadence, though the world beyond seemed to shift in subtle ways that even I, with my equine senses, could perceive. The air grew sharper with the onset of spring, but that year carried an unusual chill, the remnants of what humans called the year without a summer from 1816, when volcanic ash from a distant eruption blanketed the skies, leading to frosts in July and meager harvests. The grass in our paddocks was sparse and brittle, its usual sweetness muted, forcing the quartermasters to supplement our feeds with imported grains that arrived in sacks smelling of far-off ports. Mornings began with the soft crunch of these oats under my teeth, warmed slightly to ease the cold, and the groom's brushes glided over my coat in rhythmic patterns, loosening the winter hairs that fell like gentle snow. My new rider, Lieutenant Ellis, a quiet man with a steady seat, took me on patrols through the city streets, where the cobblestones echoed softly under my shod hooves, the fog from the river curling around us like a comforting veil. The effects of that strange weather lingered. A historical secret not often discussed. The eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815 had not only altered climates, but sparked innovations born of necessity. With horse feed scarce and prices soaring, inventors like Karl Dreis in Germany created the Laufmaschine, a precursor to the bicycle, to replace equine transport, a quiet revolution whispered in taverns, but rooted in the global chill that reduced horse populations through starvation, influencing mobility in ways that echoed into the future, as noted in meteorological journals of the era, but seldom linked to equestrian history. For us in the regiment, it meant leaner times. Our rations were measured carefully, the hay bales unpacked, with a rustle that spoke of conservation, and turnout sessions were shorter, under skies that remained overcast and brooding. By summer 1817, as the weather eased into warmer days with sunlight filtering through the leaves in golden shafts, the cavalry underwent changes. The establishment of new lancer regiments, inspired by encounters with Polish lancers during the wars, brought fresh drills to the yard. Though my unit, the Life Guards, remained heavy cavalry, We practiced alongside them, their long spears casting slender shadows, the horses learning to carry the added weight with grace. I felt the shift in formations, the ground yielding softly as we wheeled in unison, the air scented with the polish of new tack and the sweat of exertion. Ellis guided me with light touches, his voice low and encouraging, blending with the distant hum of the city awakening. Evenings in the stable were serene, the straw bedding deep and inviting, the lantern light casting warm pools where companions nickered softly in contentment. Into 1818, the rhythm of peacetime deepened. Parades for royal occasions filled our days. The clip-clop of hooves on parade grounds, the flutter of standards in the breeze, the crowds murmuring approval from behind barriers, the sense of fresh flowers tossed by admirers mingled with the earthy aroma of groomed earth, and the sun warmed my back like a familiar hand. A lesser-known aspect of this era was the post-war reduction in forces. To cut costs after the Napoleonic debts, the army disbanded several regiments in 1817, selling off thousands of horses at public auctions in Tattersall's, where bidders from farms and coaches inspected us with gentle prods. Economic measure, detailed in parliamentary records, but hidden from public view to avoid unrest, leading to many war veterans like my kin finding new lives in civilian hands, some faring well, others less so. As autumn leaves scattered in russet drifts, crunching underfoot during our exercises, reflections on my journey grew. I had borne the thunder of battle, yet now carried officers on quiet errands through parks where children played, their laughter light as birdsong. Ellis would halt me by the Serpentine, the water rippling softly, allowing me to graze on the banks where reeds swayed in the wind. These moments were tranquil, the world a tapestry of simple sensations, the cool drink from the lake, the warmth of companionship in the herd. But whispers of domestic tensions reached even the stables. Unrest among the populace, calls for reform after the war's hardships, stirring the air like an approaching storm. By 1819, those tensions manifested in events that echoed the chaos of Waterloo. Though on home soil, in August, at St. Peter's Field in Manchester, known later as the Peterloo Massacre, yeomanry cavalry charged into a crowd of protesters seeking parliamentary reform, their sabers drawn in a melee that left many injured. Though my regiment was not deployed there, being stationed in London, news traveled through the officers' conversations, carried on the wind like faint echoes. I sensed the unease in Ellis as he read dispatches by lamplight, the paper rustling softly, his sighs blending with the night. A historical secret from Peterloo is the role of untrained mounts. Many yeomanry horses were personal animals, not battle-hardened like us, leading to panic in the charge. A detail from eyewitness accounts in local archives, but suppressed in official reports to shield the authorities, highlighting the dangers of using civilian equines in crowd control and influencing later policing reforms. In the aftermath, our duties included increased patrols in the capital, the streets quiet under curfew, the air thick with the scent of torch smoke from watchmen. We moved in formation, hooves clipping rhythmically on pavement, the city lights flickering like stars reflected in puddles. Winter brought frost that crunched under us. Blankets added to our stalls for warmth, their wool scent comforting amid the chill. Feeds were enriched with carrots, their earthy sweetness a treat, and grooms massaged our legs, with lineaments that warmed like sunlight from within. As 1820 dawned, with George IV's accession, following his father's death, ceremonies abounded. The toll of bells resonant and steady, processions, where we carried dignitaries with measured grace. The air carried the floral notes of wreaths and the polish of regimental silver. Yet my years of service began to tell. At 15 hands and nearing maturity's peak, minor aches from old grazes surfaced, eased by rests in sunlit paddocks. Another hidden truth of the period was the horse plague outbreaks. Epizootic diseases swept through stables in 1820, prompting quarantine measures borrowed from naval practices but applied to land forces. A veterinary innovation recorded in army ledgers but not publicized, saving herds through isolation and herbal fumigations with sage and vinegar. Through the year, life flowed gently. Drills that honed without strain, outings where the wind sighed through Hyde Park's trees, the ground soft with fallen blossoms. Ellis promoted, his farewell mirrored Hargreaves, a quiet nuzzle and a whispered thanks. Assigned to lighter duties, I trained recruits, my steady presence a guide amid their youthful energy. Reflections on survival deepened. I had witnessed empires fall, yet found peace in the everyday. The warmth of hay, the rhythm of breaths in the dark stable. But as the decade turned toward the 1820s, signs of retirement loomed, the regiment assessing us elders for pastures new. Little did I know, the fields of Kent awaited once more, where my story would circle back to beginnings. As the 1820s unfolded, the barracks in London continued to hum with a gentle routine that had become the backdrop of my later years, though the passage of time etched subtle changes into both the world and my own form. Born in 1805, I was now approaching my 20th year, my chestnut coat still gleaming under the groom's careful brushes, but with a few more silver hairs weaving through my mane like threads of memory. The air in the stables carried the familiar blend of hay and leather, now tinged with the blooming lilacs of spring 1821, their scent wafting through open doors on breezes that whispered of renewal. My strides in the yard were steady, if a touch slower, the ground yielding softly under hooves that had carried me through thunder and peace alike. Lieutenant Ellis had been replaced by a young ensign named Thorne, whose light hands on the reins guided me through drills that echoed faintly of past glories. The commands murmured like secrets shared in the quiet. That year brought the coronation of George IV in July, a spectacle that drew us into the heart of London's pageantry. We formed part of the procession, hooves clipping rhythmically on the streets lined with cheering crowds, their voices a murmur rising like waves on a distant shore. The air was alive with the floral aromas of garlands draped from balconies, mingled with the polish of regimental brass that caught the sun in golden flashes. Banners fluttered gently overhead, and the toll of Westminster Abbey's bells resonated through the ground, a deep, soothing vibration that synced with my heartbeat. As a horse, in the royal escort, I carried Thorne near the king's carriage, feeling the weight of history in the slow, measured pace. A historical secret from this event is the hidden equine preparations to ensure the procession's smoothness. Veterinarians administered calming drafts of valerian root to the mounts, a practice drawn from ancient Persian texts, but refined in the royal mews to prevent startles amid the crowds, a subtle alchemy noted in palace ledgers but kept from public knowledge to maintain the aura of effortless grandeur. Following the coronation, life settled into serene patterns. Morning feeds of oats, warmed with molasses, their sticky sweetness coating my tongue, and afternoon rests in the paddock where sunlight dappled the grass like scattered coins. The regiment's role shifted toward ceremonial duties, with fewer demands on U.S. elders. I observed the younger horses arriving, their energy a lively contrast to my measured calm, and shared the lines with them, our breaths mingling in the cool evenings. Whispers among the officers spoke of colonial expansions, ships sailing to distant lands, but for me, it remained the quiet of home, the rustle of straw in my stall, the distant chime of church clocks marking the hours. By 1822, as autumn leaves carpeted the paths in Hyde Park with a soft, crunching layer, economic strains from the post-war years lingered. The Corn Laws, enacted in 1815 to protect British agriculture, had driven up grain prices, affecting even our feeds. Portions were adjusted carefully, supplemented with turnips, whose earthy tang became a familiar comfort. Parades continued, but with a subdued elegance, the crowds smaller, yet appreciative, their applause fading into the wind like echoes. Another lesser-known facet is the rise of pleasure-driving societies. Affluent civilians, inspired by military equestrians, formed clubs that rented retired war horses for leisurely outings, a trend documented in social diaries, but hidden from broader view as it blurred class lines, providing income for regiments while offering us gentle exercise in manicured parks. Into 1823, the air grew crisp with winter's approach, frost rhyming the stable roofs in delicate patterns that melted under the morning sun. My duties lightened further, focusing on training sessions where I demonstrated poise for recruits, the subtle shift of weight, the responsive ear to commands whispered softly. Thorne would lead me on rides along the Thames, the water lapping gently against the banks, its scent briny and invigorating. Reflections on my journey deepened, from the meadows of Kent to the mud of Waterloo, each step a thread in a vast tapestry. The world evolved around me. News of Greek independence struggles filtered through, but distantly, like stories told by firelight. As 1824 dawned, with daffodils pushing through the soil in hopeful bursts, the regiment prepared for a review by the Duke of Wellington himself, now Prime Ministers. He arrived on a quiet morning, his presence commanding, yet familiar, dismounting to inspect us, with a hand that lingered on flanks, eyes assessing with the wisdom of shared battles. I stood tall as he approached, feeling the warmth of recognition in his touch. A silent nod to Copenhagen's kin. The air carried the scent of his polished boots and the fresh hay scattered for the occasion. A secret not widely shared is Wellington's private advocacy for animal welfare. In parliamentary whispers, he pushed for the 1822 Martins Act against cruelty to cattle and horses, the first such law, inspired by his wartime observations of equine suffering, a compassionate reform buried in committee notes, but pivotal in shifting societal views, protecting creatures like me from harsh treatment in retirement. Summer brought warmer days, the sun's rays filtering through leaves in the park, casting patterns that danced like memories. I grazed peacefully, the grass sweet and lush after spring rains, the wind sighing through branches overhead. By 1825, as I turned 20, minor stiffness in my joints was eased with rubs of camphor oil, its pungent aroma soothing as it warmed my muscles. The barracks buzzed gently with talks of canal expansions and steam engines, innovations that hinted at a world less reliant on hooves, but for now, our roles held. Into 1826, autumn mists cloaked the city in a soft veil, the air scented with wood smoke from hearths. Parades for visiting dignitaries continued, our formations precise and unhurried, the ground firm underfoot. Another historical secret is the equine contribution to early railways. In 1825, the Stockton and Darlington line used horses for initial trials before steam, with war veterans like my breed pulling wagons, a transitional role noted in engineering logs, but overshadowed by locomotive glamour, bridging eras quietly. By 1827, as winter snows blanketed the grounds in hushed white, my service drew toward closure. Assessments deemed me fit for retirement, the paperwork rustling like leaves in the officers' quarters. The air carried the piney scent of holiday greens, and feeds included extra apples, their crispness a festive treat. Spring bloomed with promise, and I was led to a transport for Kent, the journey familiar, the sway of the wagon, the scent of coastal air growing stronger. Arriving at the retirement farm near my birthplace, the meadows unfolded in gentle greens, the wind carrying echoes of foalhood. The paddocks were spacious, the grass soft and abundant, companions grazing in serene groups. Days blurred into tranquility, sunrises warming my back, evenings under stars that twinkled like old friends. A lesser-known truth is the establishment of these farms, funded by veterans' subscriptions post-1815. They included therapeutic ponds for arthritic horses, inspired by Roman bath designs, but adapted with herbal infusions. A welfare innovation in estate records, but not publicized, ensuring dignified ends. Through 1829, as I wandered the fields, the earth's rhythm soothed me, the rustle of hedges, the distant low of cattle. Reflections encompassed it all, battles won, peaces cherished. But as 1830 approached, with Wellington's government facing reforms, my own twilight neared. Little did I know, the final chapters would bring closure, where stories settle like dusk over hills. As the summer of 1830 settled over the meadows of Kent, like a warm, enveloping shawl, the world around my retirement farm seemed to breathe in unison with the earth's quiet cycles, though ripples from afar hinted at changes I could sense in the wind's subtle sighs. Born in the spring of 1805, I was now 25 years strong, my steps measured and deliberate across the soft grass that yielded gently under my hooves, its blades whispering against my fetlocks like old tales retold. The air carried the heady scent of ripening wheat from neighboring fields, mingled with the wild thyme that bloomed in purple clusters along the hedgerows, releasing its aromatic essence with each passing breeze. My days unfolded in unhurried grace, mornings grazing under the dappled light of ancient oaks, their leaves rustling overhead in a perpetual lullaby, and afternoons dozing in the shade, the sun's warmth seeping into my bones like a balm for the faint aches of memory. The farm, a haven established by those quiet subscriptions from Waterloo's veterans, was a sanctuary of simplicity, fenced paddocks where companions from various campaigns gathered, their coats a patchwork of bays and grays, nickering softly in shared reminiscence. A kind farmer's wife, Mrs. Elowin, tended us with hands that smelled of chamomile and fresh apples, offering treats that crunched sweetly on my tongue. Evenings brought the distant low of cattle returning to barns, the soft patter of rain on the thatch, if clouds gathered, and the stars emerging, one by one, their light agental constellation mapping the quiet expanse. Few know a secret of these retirement havens. They were modeled after monastic scriptoria, where medieval monks preserved knowledge, but here adapted for animals, enclosures with inscribed wooden plaques recounting a horse's service, a practice drawn from 12th century cloister traditions, but revived post-Waterloo in private estates, as detailed in faded farm ledgers, ensuring our stories endured beyond the living. That year, whispers of unrest drifted southward from Paris, where revolution stirred once more. King Charles IX's July ordinances dissolved the chamber, sparking barricades and cries for reform that echoed the 100 Days' fervor. News arrived via riders on lathered mounts, their hooves clipping on the lane, voices murmuring in the farmhouse parlor. I lifted my head from the grass, ears pricking to the cadence of change, feeling the subtle shift in the air, like the calm before a summer shower. For you Selders, it stirred faint echoes of 1815, the thunder of hooves on Belgian soil, but now distant, softened by time. The French monarchy fell in August, Philippe d'Orléans ascending as Louis-Philippe, a citizen king who promised moderation. A lesser-known historical thread is the equine role in this upheaval. Revolutionary crowds commandeered royal stables, freeing horses, like Napoleon's Marengo descendants, for public use, a symbolic act documented in Parisian gazettes, but suppressed in official chronicles to avoid glorifying mob actions, subtly redistributing bloodlines that would influence European breeding for generations. Autumn painted the landscape in hues of amber on crimson, the leaves drifting down in lazy spirals to carpet the ground, crunching softly under my wandering steps. I shared the meadow with a retired dragoon horse named Storm, his coat scarred from peninsula campaigns, and wested flank to flank, breaths sinking in the cooling air, the wind carrying the scent of the wood smoke from distant hearths. Reflections deepened in these moments, the fragility of thrones, the endurance of the earth beneath us. The farm's routine held steady, morning rubs with brushes that glided in soothing arcs, easing the stiffness in my hocks, and midday dips in a shallow pond where water lapped coolly at my legs, its ripples a mirror for drifting clouds. Mrs. Elowin's son, a boy of 10 with eyes like polished chestnuts, would visit, leading me on gentle circuits along the stream. His small hands, confident, yet tender, whispering names of battles he'd heard in tales. By winter, 1830, 1831, frost etched delicate patterns on the pond's surface, the air crisp with the promise of snow, and blankets were draped over us at night, their woolen warmth a comforting weight. Feeds included steamed mashes laced with ginger for circulation, their spicy aroma warming from within. The Revolution's aftershocks reached England subtly. Reform societies forming in towns, petitions rustling like dry leaves in assembly halls. Wellington, my old duke, faced parliamentary pressure as Prime Minister. His government's resistance to change fueling debates that filtered to rural quiet like faint thunder. Another hidden aspect of the era is the horse telegraph networks. Post-revolution, French couriers use relay stables with timed mounts to speed dispatches, a system refined from Napoleonic days, but expanded with Belgian drafts for endurance, as noted in diplomaticables, but overlooked in histories, accelerating news across borders and influencing British intelligence reforms. Spring 1831 brought renewal, the meadows greening with tender shoots that tickled my muzzle, the sun's rays lengthening into golden afternoons. I felt the vitality of the season, though my gait carried the wisdom of years, each step a deliberate savoring of the now. Visitors came occasionally, veterans with graying whiskers, drawn by the plaques, sharing apples and stories by the fence, their voices low on dissonant. One, a former sergeant from the Union Brigade, recounted capturing a French eagle, his hand resting on my withers, as if bridging eras. The air hummed with bees in the clover, their buzz a soft underscore to conversations that wove Waterloo's threads into the present. As summer returned in 1832, the push for reform culminated in the Great Reform Act passing in June after years of agitation. The bill redistributed seats in Parliament, enfranchising more middle-class voices, a seismic shift that quelled unrest without revolution. From the farm, I sensed the celebration's echo, bells tolling in the village, their chimes carrying on the breeze like harmonious breaths. For horses like me, it meant indirect ripples, improved roads funded by new taxes, easing travel for those who might visit our pastures. A secret, not commonly known, is the Act's equine footnote. Lobbying included clauses for better rural infrastructure, drawing from war veterans' petitions for safer lanes to prevent accidents with livestock, a pragmatic detail in Hansard records, but buried amid political fanfare, enhancing countryside welfare. Into autumn 1832, the leaves fell in a gentle rain, the ground softening underfoot, and I pondered the arc of my life, from foal in Kent's sunlit fields to the mud-churned chaos of Waterloo, through London's parades, and this serene twilight. Companions thinned, storm passed in October, his final breath a soft sigh against my side, the meadow quieter, without his steady presence. Mrs. Elowin mourned with us, scattering wildflowers whose petals drifted like farewells. Winter followed, snow blanketing the world in hush, the air scented with pine from wreaths on the gate, nights lit by hearth glow, visible from the barn. By 1833, as I neared 28, the farm's rhythms comforted my fading vigor, the warmth of sunlit dozes, the cool evening grazes under moonlight that silvered the grass. The Slavery Abolition Act passed that year, another reform's quiet triumph, whispers of which reached even here, symbolizing chains broken far and wide. Reflections crystallized. I'd been a vessel for human ambitions, yet found my own peace in the earth's embrace, the sensory world a constant, sense of bloom and decay, sounds of wind and water, touches of sun and soil. As 1834 dawned, my strength waned gently, legs folding more readily in the shade, breaths shallower but content. One crisp morning in May, under a sky of boundless blue, I lay in the meadow, the grass cradling me like my mother sighed in foalhood. The wind sighed through the oaks, carrying lavender's farewell, and companions gathered nearby, their knickers a chorus of companionship. Mrs. Elowen stroked my muzzle, her tears warm on my coat, whispering thanks for journeys shared. The sun warmed me one last time, its light fading softly into twilight, the world quiet, so very quiet. And in that peace, I slipped away, my story woven into the land's eternal rhythm, a war horse's tale of thunder and tranquility, defeat and enduring calm. If this journey through my eyes at Waterloo has brought you a measure of peace, dear listener, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more whispers from history's quiet corners, and share in the comments where you're drifting off tonight, or which animal's tale calls to you next. May your dreams carry you to gentle meadows. Good night and soft repose.